Well, good morning, my friend. Welcome to Saturday morning. Hope your morning is starting well. Hey, I want to talk to you this morning about breaking bad habits. Habits, we all have habits. And how do you break bad habits? Habits are those things that we do that are on auto response. So habits, it's just like there's a trigger, there's a response. There's a trigger, there's a response. We have good habits and we have bad habits. How do we break bad habits and replace them with good habits? So every habit has a perceived reward. There's a value. There's something about that habit. There's a reason we do it. And our habits are so challenging sometimes because we don't have awareness of what they are. So I want to talk to you this morning about breaking bad habits. And starting with, growth begins with awareness. You hear Robin and I talk about this all the time. Growth begins with awareness. But it's realized in action. So if we want to break habits, we first have to become aware of what they are. Now, most people, they know they have bad habits. They know what most of those are. Sometimes it's like, I know there's a habit under there that I'm doing and they're not really sure what it is. But our habits, first, when we become aware of what our habits are, so habits tend to fall into some categories. We have habits that have a perceived value of protecting us, or we have habits that we do that are more in a category to pacify us. So, for example, you might have a bad habit of procrastination. And you have that project that's due and you're always procrastinating. Why do you do that? So first, if you can be aware of what your habit is, but then if you can be aware of why you do it. So for example, if you have a habit of procrastination typically falls into a category of protection. In that we're doing that, we procrastinate for a sense of protection. So think about this for a minute. You've got this project you want to put out there, you want to do this thing, but you keep putting it off because if you don't put it out there, you can't fail. If you don't put it out there, you can't be judged. If you don't do it, if you don't put it out there, you keep putting it off to protect yourself. And it's this kind of underlying protection. Other habits we do to pacify. So think about a lot of people who stress eat or emotional eat. They do it to pacify. When a child is angry or crying, we give them a pacifier, and it's to soothe and to pacify that emotion. And so when people stress eat, they find themselves all stressed out and they go to the pantry and they're pacifying that emotion, or maybe they're scrolling on Facebook or doing something to soothe or to pacify. So once you become aware of what your habit is and why you have that habit or what that is, and you kind of know what triggers it, that emotion, that stress, how do you break bad habits? I want to give you one tip. One thing you can do to break bad habits. There's all kinds of strategies. There's all kinds, remove all the triggers. But I've come across this tip that or this method of breaking bad habits that I just challenge you to try. And I'll use emotional eating because it's just a great example to use with this. There's so many people who struggle with emotional eating. They eat when they're happy. They eat when they're sad. They eat when they're stressed. They eat when they're, every reason, every emotion, they can find a reason to pacify it with food. So I want to use this as an example and give you a tool that you can use to break bad habits. Now, if you're going to break a bad habit, typically we have to replace it with a good habit because there's a trigger, there's something that's happening that triggers this auto response to do this thing. So the trigger, it's like stress, you're stressed out, you find yourself at the pantry. So how do you break that? I want to give you this tool. So try this. Not when you're in the middle of the problem, not when you're stressed out, But when you're not stressed out, go to the pantry. Go to the pantry and take a pad of paper with you or a notepad or something that you can write on and stand in front of the pantry where you have the habit that you're trying to break. And ask yourself this question. When I'm stressed, what would my best self do? When I'm stressed, what would my best self do? How do you want to respond when you're stressed? See, most people don't break their bad habits because number one, they don't know what's happening. They've never really become aware of what's going on. And so they find themselves in that situation and it's just auto response because they've not thought through what they should do when they're in that situation. So go to the pantry and stand in front of the pantry and imagine you're stressed. And when I'm stressed, this is what I do. But what do I want to do? What would my best self do? How would my best self show up when I'm stressed? And write it down. So it might be that when I'm stressed, instead of going to the pantry, I do breathing exercises. Or when I'm stressed, instead of going to the pantry, I call a friend. And that's what I do. That's the new habit that when I'm stressed, when I'm stressed, I go for a walk. When I'm stressed, I work out. When I'm stressed, what do you want to do instead of going to the pantry? If you know what you want to do, you're more likely to be able to do it. The reason you don't do it is because you don't know what you should do. You've not thought it through. This works with any kind of habit. How would my best self show up? When you think of your best self, what are the characteristics of your best self when you're stressed? What are the characteristics of your best self when you're angry? What are the characteristics of your best self when you've got that project to do and your normal habit, your bad habit is to procrastinate? Well, what would your best self do? What would my best self do in this situation? In whatever your habit is, go to that place when like you're there with a pad of paper and ask yourself, when this trigger happens, what do I want to do? Growth begins with awareness. When we're talking about working on our habits, we really don't want bad habits. We don't like the fact that we have bad habits. We want to change our bad habits. How can you put a good habit in place? It starts with awareness and then an identification of what you want as your best self, how you want to show up as your best self. It's just a thought this morning. Growth begins with awareness, but it's realized in action. Become aware, identify a new action, and then live into that new action. Start practicing the new action. When the trigger happens, you have an identification of what you want to do. Start practicing the new habit and get a new reward, because every habit has a reward. Think about this. That reward of soothing, well, there's also a new reward that comes with the new habit. When your best self shows up, that produces a dopamine rush. There's a chemical release. There's joy in that. There's victory in that. And that's a new reward. Live into that new reward. Live into that victory and start creating new habits in place of the habit you want to break. It's Saturday morning. Let's have a great day today. You have a choice today how you show up. I have a choice today how I show up. Let's go live this day on purpose and have a great